in Battle for Azeroth, during the so-called Fourth War, which is really nothing like what an actual Fourth War should actually look like, but that is what they called it, and it's beside the point. During this Fourth War, there is a patch in Battle for Azeroth when the fleets of Kul Tiras and Zandalar are setting out across the sea to fight each other. And as they sail into the open ocean between them, suddenly they are surprised by a surprise attack from Queen Nazjatar herself. The sea itself suddenly opens up underneath them. Oh, the ships crash onto the newly exposed dry land below. Even if we forget the logistics of why would the Naga want dry land, don't you have a better advantage underwater where you can breathe but they can't? Like, even if we forget these logistics, let's just continue with the story. The sea opens up and all the ships crash down on the newly exposed dry land below. And as soon as you gather your bearings, reconvene with your allies, and find new friends in this new land, whether it be the Gilblins of the Unshackled or the Waveblade and Cohens, you gather together, and as you start exploring this new land, you are confronted with the projection of Queen Nazjatar herself, who proudly announces to you, "Welcome to Nazjatar." Except it's not. It can't be. And here's why. You see, Nazjatar in WoW, the Nazjatar we got in WoW has bothered me for a long time now, since BFA, because when you start to think about this zone for even a moment, it starts very quickly falling apart. And like I said in the introduction, I'm not even talking about the very logistics. Why wouldn't the Naga want to expose the bottom of the sea? Like, they have more advantage underwater. They would want to drown the fleets, but they wouldn't drown the fleets. They would want you to drown, you know? I know that this is for very gamey reasons, because the players hated playing in Vashj'ir. Majority of the players hated playing in Vashj'ir in Cataclysm. So they didn't want to do an actual underwater zone again, but they still had to tackle the Queen Nazjatar. So they had to somehow bring the players to the Naga without giving them the playstyle they didn't want. So they contrived this whole thing with opening up the sea, and there was some speculation that Nazjatar wanted to then collapse the water on top of them and drown them, but why didn't she then immediately do that after we landed? We had like a good bit of time before we retrieved the Tidestone, before she was unable to collapse the sea back onto us. But without even thinking about these logistics, the whole zone, as we got it in WoW, makes no sense. So I have a couple of exhibits of evidence which shows why this zone can't be Nazjatar as we have known it in prior lore. Exhibit A. You should be seeing right now a map that I will try to stretch the map out onto the whole video, so it's not just on the tiny projector screen. You should be seeing a map right now, a map that shows you the 3 important locations from the Chronicle map, which is supposed to be the lore-scaled map with the scales of the continents and their places placed where they should be in the lore. And you will see that Kul Tiras is here, and Zandalar is here. See, and now the fleets from these 2 islands were sailing out to fight each other. Now the 3rd location you will see, I have pointed out on this map, is the location of the Maelstrom. Now, Do you know what's under the Maelstrom? Maelstrom happened in the former location of the Well of Eternity, and on the shores of the Well of Eternity lied the Zin-Azshari, the capital city of the old Kaldora Empire and the capital city of Vashj'ir. And what happened to Zin-Azshari after the Sundering? It was mostly destroyed because the waves swept through everything, but then the Naga actually rebuilt a new capital on top of Zin-Azshari, and that's where they built their capital city of Nazjatar. So the third point you see pointed out on this map is the Maelstrom, and there the lore, well, according to the lore, Nazjatar should be. Now, let's assume that the zone we see in World of Warcraft is Nazjatar. That would mean that these two fleets were sailing for some reason in this direction, all the way away from each other. And they were sailing towards the Maelstrom. The Maelstrom is famous in the lore for one major reason. It's a massive friggin' storm. And it destroys pretty much every ship that comes near. The only reason we were able to see the Maelstrom in Cataclysm than in Legion is because a bunch of shamans teleported onto some rocks in there. Like, you had to teleport onto the rocks jutting out above it, because otherwise you can't sail there. So these two fleets would have to sail halfway across the world to an extremely dangerous place that tears ships apart, and then act surprised that they get torn apart. Or, what is more likely, they sailed, to each other. They sailed at each other, and they met somewhere in the middle. So if those two fleets were sailing at each other and met in the middle, they met somewhere around here, between them. And if that is where the sea opened up and swallowed them, then that means that that location doesn't agree with the lore location of Nazjatar, which can only mean one of two things. Either those two fleets were sailing out halfway across the world for no apparent reason, instead of the most logical, the most apparent possible direction to fight each other, or Nazjatar was suddenly relocated, retconned to be halfway across the world. But we have no other evidence to the location of Nazjatar being retconned. It is still mentioned as having been built on top of Zin-Azshari. And we even have ruins in the zone in World of Warcraft. We have ruins in the zone that are called the ruins of Zin-Azshari. So it's still supposed to be in Zin-Azshari. So which one of these two happened? But if they really sailed halfway across the world, and if they really were trying to fight all the way over there, we have the second big problem. My exhibit B, and that is the Maelstrom, is nowhere to be seen. If you look around either the zone itself as you are in the game, or if you look at the kinematics when the sea opens up, you will see something, a very huge glaring thing that is missing from the screen, and that's the Maelstrom. The Maelstrom, the whole massive storm that puts the eye of Jupiter. Is that what it's called? I've probably, in editing, I'll probably put the actual name in subtitles. A massive friggin' storm that is like the size of a country. and it is nowhere to be seen. If we were in Nazjatar, we should be right next to the maelstrom. We should be seeing it covering up the whole friggin' sky. You know? Or we should be like in the middle of the thing, being torn apart actively, and it is nowhere to be seen. But this also connects this location in between Kul Tiras and Zandalar. This connects to my third point of evidence, my Exhibit C, and that is the location of the prison of N'Zoth. Because you see, in the Chronicle that came out before Legion, before Battle for Azeroth, they showed us the location of N'Zoth's prison. And conveniently, if you look at this map, which shows you the prisons of the old gods, you see those shapes that I will try to outline in editing the map. You will see those shapes that look very much like the shape of what Kul Tiras would look like in the BFA lore, and what Zandalar looks like. And conveniently, the prison of N'Zoth is right between them. You know, right in the place, the prison of N'Zoth, which is located in the game, is located in the Nazjatar zone, and it is conveniently located between Kul Tiras and Zandalar, which is exactly where those two fleets would be sailing. But that is not in Nazjatar, because Nazjatar is located on the shores of the Well of Eternity, which is where Y'Shaarj was located before Aman'thul ripped him out of the planet. So either N'Zoth's prison was retconned, and it is now located like right next to where Y'Shaarj was, or those two fleets were sailing at each other and crashed on top of N'Zoth's prison. As I have briefly touched on, and while I was presenting the arguments, there are only a few possible explanations to try to make sense of all this. And option 1, the location of N'Zoth's prison has been retconned, which is not impossible, but it would have to move N'Zoth's prison right next to the location of Y'Shaarj, and the two old gods, when they were both alive, they would have to have lived like right next to each other, and the old gods aren't really like that. They don't like each other. They kept fighting each other back in the day in the Black Empire, and there is no evidence that such a retcon actually happened, besides this point of N'Zoth's prison being apparently in Nazjatar. Option 2, the location of Nazjatar has been retconned, and Nazjatar is no longer located at the edge of the Maelstrom, is no longer located where Zin-Azshari was, and has been moved halfway across the world to be located in between Kul Tiras and Zandalar. But other than this speculation, there is also no evidence of Nazjatar having been moved. Option C, the two fleets were swimming halfway across the world and somehow reached some like edge of Nazjatar where you can't see the maelstrom somehow, but it still requires moving N'Zoth's prison. Option D, Nazjatar is the size of half the planet. Nazjatar would have to stretch from the Well of Eternity all the way to Kul Tiras and Zandalar, and there are islands in between these two places. So do Naga really have a city the size of half the planet? Or what is more likely? All of those things that require a lot of speculation, that require creating a lot of elements that were not explicitly stated anywhere. Or the place these two fleets were sailing at is located between Kul Tiras and Zandalar, and it's just not Nazjatar. Maybe it's just another random place, and from everything I've seen, from all the evidence I've presented to you, this looks like the simplest, most likely answer seems to be that this zone wasn't designed to be Nazjatar. It was designed to be an underwater zone located between Kul Tiras and Zandalar, and maybe sometime during the design process someone said, well, we can't just sell just random underwater zone number 5. To really sell this patch, we need to call it something catchy, something the players will recognize, give it some name that the players will want to visit. So we are going to name it Nazjatar, no matter how little sense it makes. And this to me sounds like the most likely answer. A marketing quote-unquote blunder that didn't really care for the lore at all. And if you have seen any other videos on the channel, you know that what we like to do is talking about how I fixed quote-unquote World of Warcraft for a TTRPG. So this is the section where I tell you how I fixed this. And the fix was very simple. I did exactly what I commented last, and I said that this zone that Kul Tiras and Zandalar visited in BFA just wasn't Nazjatar, and it was in fact a zone that I called Kalmathir, after this little ruin right in the middle of it. And this is just one of many underwater naga zones that exist somewhere in the world, most of which I have not named, because there's a lot of them and I don't really have right now ideas for every little tiny naga thing in between. And we haven't done a lot with it, but we have visited Kalmathir, the zone, the so-called Nazjatar zone, briefly. We have visited it. We made a small deal with Azhara, dealing with one of the enemies of hers. And this is also a small complaint about the plot in BFA, where Azhara seems to be all too friendly with N'Zoth. Like, in the end, she kind of tries to betray him. She is acting sassy with him in the kinematic, but still serving his ends. Like, Warbringer's Azhara, this is the different kinematic, not the one I was just talking about, but in the Warbringer's Azhara kinematic, she also is like, I'm not going to be a slave, I'm going to be a queen. And N'Zoth is like, that actually sounds mad. That was very weird to me, because, like, if N'Zoth really heard that I'm not going to be a slave, I'm going to be a queen, what N'Zoth, the master manipulator, should have done is like, sure, we'll call you a queen. A slave queen. yeah, you're my queen, sure, go on. That's what is the most logical choice for N'Zoth, and not going. I try to put the mic away so my screaming isn't too loud. But this is just a very weird reaction, and I'm starting to digress again, because I had like this very brief miniature script, and I started to digress of it because I ended it. But we had a small deal with Queen Azhara where we helped fight N'Zoth's minions because she wants to stay in control. And then we left. We officially were still enemies, but we had some small dealings. And we haven't done a lot with Kalmathir or Nazjatar, but I would like to eventually return and make like a proper. I would love to make like a proper season located in under the sea in the whole Naga lands, with the deal with the Makrura, who are supposed to have a huge capital near the maelstrom too, called Makaru. Like, people just look at Makrura and think they're like stupid lobsters, but they're intelligent creatures. And I would love to come back to that. Our game has really veered away from all those like canon expansions, and we're doing very much our own thing nowadays. But we are also doing like some very small side things that kind of allude to what's happening in the old world, and maybe one day we could return to Nazjatar, the real Nazjatar. Return to the real Nazjatar and deal, with Azshara, with the Naga plots, which I really think should have been its own expansion at some point. Ideally, between like Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm, or maybe instead of Cataclysm, it should have been a real expansion and not just wasted Azshara on a single patch. But but in the end, I have to say something else that is really important to say. Blizzard says this is Nazjatar. Therefore, officially in the canon lore, this is actually Nazjatar, no matter how little sense it makes, because it's not actually a real world, and it's just in the Blizzard's imagination. And if they say this is Nazjatar, then it is, sadly, Nazjatar. I am not under the same kind of delusions that a lot of Warcraft role players seem to be, where they make their whole or own version of what it's really like, and contradict the game. I have been in so many arguments about the lore where people are like, well, I don't like what this quest says, therefore it's not true. No, dude, you are not a bigger authority on Warcraft lore than the actual game. This is something that is a potential topic for another video, and that is death in World of Warcraft is weird. There are several quests where death is treated very lightly, where there is a guy that was eaten to the bone in Borean Tundra. There's a guy who was eaten to the bone, and we resurrect him, and then he's fine. There is a Draenei who was cut to pieces and sewn into abominations. Then we put him back together. He gets resurrected by a Death Knight, and he's not even undead. He's back to being just alive. So we know death in World of Warcraft is weird, but role players would say that no, death is very hard. Death and resurrection in the Warcraft lore is very hard. It's pretty much never happens. So what are these things? And basically their argument bogs down to, well, I don't like what this quest says, so I choose to ignore this quest. No. The lore shows very clearly that resurrection is not hard in the lore. Resurrection is in fact very simple, and it happens all the time. You just don't like it, and you pretend it's different. But that is a whole pet peeve. That is a whole other topic. So in the end, this is, in the canon lore, this is Nazjatar. Even if I don't like it, even if I think it makes no sense, in the canon this is Nazjatar. It shouldn't be, but it is. And that's all that can be said on the topic in the end. Well, if you would like to see or hear more mad rants about very pedantic little tiny things in Warcraft lore, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and do all the YouTube things. It's something I haven't said in a little while in a video, but and there's a Ko-fi page linked in the description below where you can also support the channel. So that will be all for this video, and I hope to see you next time.